Welcome everyone to this unlimited webinar on business planning. I hope you can all hear me very well. My name is Marika. I work for Unlimited in our mentoring and pro bono team. I'd like to welcome and introduce you to our host today, Richard Dickens from Make It Happen Consultancy. Richard has been working with Unlimited for a couple of years now. He very kindly does mentoring for us, supports our entrepreneurs, but also and has run webinars for us before. But through his day job, he's a founder of, as I said, a consultancy called Make It Happen, and he works regularly with a number of social entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs, supporting them with their income generation, and with their understanding and evidencing their social impact in particular, in addition to other things. So Richard will talk you through his webinar, which will be about 40 to 45 minutes. After that, we'll take questions. So if you look at your GoToWebinar dashboard, you can see there's a chat function. And through that, you can post questions. So I will make a note of those as we go along, and then we'll cover those at the end. You will get access to Richard's slides, so we'll send those to everyone afterwards. And also you can ask questions after the webinar as well if you have some, but we can also cover hopefully most of those at the end of this webinar. So I think that's enough from me. Over to you, Richard, and I will mute myself and I will come back to you after the webinar with the questions.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. As Marika said, my name is Richard Dickens. I'm delighted to be able to spend the next hour or so to impart some knowledge which hopefully you're going to find useful, informative, and at the very least, something you can take away to actually help you within your own organisation, no matter where in your journey you actually are. Because business planning itself is generally about planning for the future. So it's always relevant depending on what organisation and where you are on your individual journey. So, just a quick bit about Make It Happen. We are specialists in income generation, change and social value. And as Marika said, that we've been supporting now Unlimited for a number of years, and it's important to us because it's nice to be able to actually provide that knowledge and understanding of income and planning. And as you can see, that we've been doing it a while, so all this is actually come down to our practical knowledge. And that's the reason the slide's up there, really, just to say, actually, it's not about theoretical, this is about the practical knowledge and understanding of what we've seen and we've learned and we've developed over a number of years, and hopefully we can say impart that knowledge at least a little bit today. So, basics then is what's actually a business plan. Now this is actually quite a confusion in some aspects on what it's for and what it can be developed in. But ultimately it's a visionary document. It's a document that will actually give you a focus of where to go, what to do, and what type of organisation you actually want to create it into. A very common misdemeanor can be that you create it and it's a lovely 10, 20, 30, 40 page document which you create it looks really nice, and then it goes in the bottom drawer and never to be seen again until somebody asks for it. Now it should really be a document that is actually a living, breathing thing. So something which really kind of defines who you are, what you want to become, and what type of organisation you want to develop into. Because actually you've got so many different choices as an organisation and as an individual. It's very important to understand that. So it's all about setting the mission, vision and values, and that's very much about looking about who you want to be and what actually is important to you as an individual, because any business plan has to represent you as an individual, part of the senior management team or part of the directors. It's all about turning your high-level thoughts into reality. So if you have a vision to to support those in health and well-being and support people with personal budgets or within digital media, what you need to have a look at is actually how can that actually be down in the nuts and bolts and turn it into reality. It provides a vision but sets direction, because there are so many influences at the moment. There are austerity measures, income generation is proving challenging, and it's very easy to go off topic. It's very easy to go in different directions and actually where you need to be. So it's definitely for that. And some people always ask me as well, exactly how long should I write a business plan for? Now, if you have a crystal ball, I would say 5 years plus. But in reality terms, at the moment, life is changing so quickly, it's not actually possible to do more than 5 years. So I'll say actually it's relevant for the short and medium term, so up to including 3 years is probably relevant. It sets a clear focus, but actually it sets a focus of actually what type of resources you need. And whether that's the skills, knowledge, experience, whether it's income, and whether there's other sources of relationships that you need to develop to actually kind of make your ideas, make your products and services actually come to fruition. And naturally, actually demonstrates future sustainability. Now, if you're looking at getting grants and loans, going into partnership, more and more organisations will look to actually understand where you actually want to be in the future. Because ultimately, if you've got a clear defined vision and you've actually got a clear defined path of how you're going to get there, it breeds a lot of confidence. And that confidence comes in many different ways, but ultimately people will trust what you're trying to achieve and actually are more likely to support you. So actually following on from a business plan, or what context it's actually in, as you can see by this slide, it actually puts things in perspective, because people can get these things confused. So the very, very, very core thing is, okay, what's your purpose? So that's your first thing. It's the vision, it's an idea, it's your passion. But then it comes down to your strategy, and that is very much very high level thinking again. And that's looking around the market, that's looking around a geographical location, that's looking around where the needs are. And then your organisational plan will actually bring that all together and actually put it into a succinct, concise plan which will enable you to, say, communicate who you are, what you want to be. And as and when you actually get busier, bigger, multiple areas, then you would use the business plan to actually start to inform the departmental plans. So as and when you have an operations department, or you have health and well-being, and you may have education, each of those would have a different plan. And that plan would actually reflect your organisational business plan, but articulate it in a way that they would need to be able to put it into existence. And obviously the operation delivery. So the purpose, we've kind of touched upon it a little bit, but the purpose is actually in many different ways. First thing is actually demonstrating your worth. And your worth actually comes not only financially, but also non-financially. So that, what I mean by that is very much about social value and social impact. As a social entrepreneur, you will actually have not only the money focus, but you will also have that value, the impact and the outcomes of what you do. Your business plan is actually a really great way of actually saying, I tell you what, yes, we are making money and we are sustainable, but one of our core objectives is to make some degree of value, impact and effects on people's lives. So it does that. It sets directions, as we mentioned before, and it defines purpose. But the other thing it does, actually very clearly, it helps you market and communicate your products and services by communicating your vision. So unless you actually know what your marketplace is, unless you know what the key factors are, and actually unless you know who you are and what you want to become, actually how can you communicate that? Now, also what it will do is define your products and services over a length of period, say 1, 2, 3 years. And then what it will enable you to do is examine and define what resources you actually want to put into that to make that happen. And that resources come in financial and non-financial terms. And then lastly, but no means least, is very much about demonstrating sustainability. So again, people need to be able to be confident that your organisation is sustainable. So can it pay its way? When can it pay its way? If an organisation is on contract with you, i.e. public services, actually they want to make sure that you are going to be there throughout the length of the contract. And that's only done by actually defining how that's going to look with actually within your business plan. So what we've got now is actually looking at the reason for creating a business plan, but it's looking at the strategic and the operational. So it's both of those different things. So within your organisation you need that dreamer, the passion, the enthusiasm, which you've all got, I know you have. But it's actually then translating that into operationally, how will it look? Now, within a business plan and within a social entrepreneur area, actually a sustainable business looks like this. And it's a very nice machine actually. But the first thing you've got is profit. Now profit's a good thing. It's what you do with the profit. So you can generate profit in different ways, which we come on to in a little bit. And then we've got ethics. Initially ethics people perceive to be what's right and what's wrong. Actually yes, there's an element of that, but actually it goes beyond. It's what people value about you and how you communicate your personal and organisation values. Now, there's a lot of research been done of late where actually people are making more decisions based on what they personally believe, ethics and values. And that's actually kind of changed over the last few years to one where 3 out of 5 purchases are based on people's ethics. How many times have you seen in the newspaper lately where perhaps MPs' expenses, you see that and everyone thinks actually that's wrong, and actually the power of people having a chance to influence and change that. And you put that down into your organisation that if people see you acting in what they perceive to be a wrong way or incorrect or perhaps not in the best interest of your service users, people can actually decide to move and change away from your organisation to a competitor, possibly. And obviously it's all about people as well, isn't it? So actually people is about engagement, development, supporting, nurturing. It's not about, you know, a traditional hardcore business which actually, you know, treats people, unfortunately, with little personality and little personal support. It's about that. All about that individual. It's all about that personal service. And if you get those balance of those three right, the fourth one comes in quite easily, and that's where the social impact comes in. And social impact basically means every time you provide a service, provide a product, there's an impact on something or somebody. If you're providing health services, ultimately you're there to hopefully make people feel better or healthier, and that's got a repercussion. That's got a repercussion on public services, because every time you make someone healthier, they're no longer dependent on public sector, NHS, etc. If you're providing a local service, actually you're investing with local suppliers. So again, there's an impact. So putting that into context of how that looks. So if you can understand that, what we've then got a challenge to do is actually create a business plan that people read and covers all the main components, which is highlighted on this next slide. So no one actually reads a business plan in its entirety. What people tend to do is skim through it unless it's important to them. So the executive summary is immensely important, and that's generally a one-pager. A one-page summary of who you are, how you've got to where you are today, and what your marketplace is. so that anyone can pick it up and actually get a feel of your organisation very, very, very quickly. This is really important to funders and very important to supporters as well. And that can be public information quite happily. There's nothing in there which is really contentious, and certainly nothing in there which is confidential. Mission and vision. Now, mission and vision has to be very clearly demonstrated because that's what you're working to. Why are you doing what you're doing? How are you going to do what you're going to do? But then actually look at the aims and objectives. So what are you trying to achieve? Now, you can split these if you want to business aims and objectives, which is all about sustainability and profit making and development of services. But you can, if you want to, put also social aims and objectives. So these could be to improve the lives of over 65s in Cheshire by way of XXX. So you can really pull it out if you're providing a service, because people will latch on to that. And where a social enterprise or a social business plan changes away from traditional plans is about what you value and how your values are. And that's all about, pretty simply, is saying to people, this is what I stand for. So as Make It Happen, for example, we believe in knowledge transfer. We believe in supporting people who otherwise not access advice and guidance. So these are our own personal values. So why not put that out there? This is who you are. You don't have to be a robot in business. You can be very much a person. But actually people will welcome that, particularly now with the changing market. So once you've got those, you've actually gone into kind of another area now, which is evidence of need. And that's very much about defining why there's need for your product and service. Now, we'll come to that a little bit later, but it's one of the biggest things that funders look for. Because ultimately, if you're looking for funding, grant funding, people want to know that you are going to tackle an area of need. Then it's all about products and services. Just demonstrating what your products and services are now and what they're going to develop into in the future. So considering market forces, what's happening within the UK, or perhaps further afield. And then you look about the organisational structure. So at the moment you may be just a one-person organisation, but that will change hopefully as you grow and develop. For those bigger organisations, you've really got to articulate what the key positions are and the key roles and responsibilities. And particularly if you're looking for support in terms of finance and volunteering, what I would suggest is you need to demonstrate the core skills just as 1 or 2 paragraphs of the directors and senior personnel, because that gives confidence to people that actually you've got an organisation and individuals within the organisation are at the helm and they know what they're doing effectively. Then you've got to think about the research and development. So how are you going to develop? How are you going to innovate? How are you going to create sustainability? How are you going to look for new markets? In the growth plan, where are you going to grow? Not everybody wants to take over the world. Well, that's fine. But actually you need to define where you're going to look at. So if you're in Manchester, for example, that's great. You may start off with Manchester, and in year 2 you may decide northwest, year 3 the north, year 4 Midlands, and year 5 south. So within 5 years you've got a total UK coverage. It may be smaller, it may be wards and boroughs, and it doesn't really matter. If you've got an online service, obviously you're geographically not restricted, but you're still restricted in terms of market. Okay, it's looking at the income generation. Where's that income coming from? Really, really important. HR, that's only important as and when you grow and develop. But if you choose to engage with volunteers, for example, we need to define exactly what that would look like. And actually is looking at things, for example, of perhaps benefits, employee benefits. It's looking about performance management and how are you going to develop a succession plan. Because the danger is with any organisation, particularly when it's small, you only rely on a few key individuals. And actually it's very dangerous to do that. But actually when you're small you don't have a lot of other opportunity not to be fair. So one of the key things is to look about how you're going to make sure that you retain that knowledge and that expertise. And as and when and if a key member of staff goes, what plan do you have in place to support the service to continue until such time as you can receive a replacement? Naturally is financial management, so we come on to that a little bit later, but that's looking about the income and expenditure. Obviously that's about marketing and communications. If you know where your vision, you know your values, you know your products and services, and you know your marketplace, straight away you know, or should know, how to communicate with them. One of the key things will be about quality. So how do you demonstrate quality within your organization? And actually that's a tricky one, because you can look at different different standards and different marks, but ultimately people need to feel 100% confident that you're delivering a product that meets their need and isn't going to fall apart. Or if you're providing a service, how do you know the advice and support that you're providing is actually better than the person down the road? Then we come on to social impact. As I said before, that's about demonstrating your impact far beyond your initial approach. So take within health again, if you're providing an hour's worth of support, yes, you'll go in and provide an hour's worth of support, and your outcome is that person may feel happier. But your impact may be that person now has greater independence, and that in itself is worth more both financially and non-financially to many different people. And it also sets out boundaries and parameters for evaluation. Now the last few are actually even more key. Actually think about your risk. And there's always risk to an organisation developing, very much looking at how it can grow, but there are risks associated with this. So you can't reduce and mitigate every risk, but what you can do is come up and review what are the core risks of you as an organisation. And that may be the fact of people leaving. That may be the fact of competitors entering the marketplace. It may be the fact of stakeholders not engaging. But if you understand these to be risks, what you can do is come up with a very brief summary of what the issue could be and how you would actually react to that. And that demonstrates due diligence, and in many people's eyes shows a great deal of thinking, and therefore more confidence is provided as such. The resources, well, what do you need to make it happen? So is it IT, is it infrastructure, is it personnel, is it knowledge? If you know where you're going, obviously then you know what resources you need to get you there. And then ultimately it's about financial forecast, because you're trying to make a living. Money may not be the only driving factor, but it will be one. And it's actually how that income can be developed and sustained. So it's doing a 3-year income and expenditure report, defining all your expenditure under key headings, and also where your income's coming from. And that will give you the core bones of the key headings, underpinned by an action plan. So it's great you come up with all these ideas, but how are you going to put it into reality? And that's essential. So these are the thoughts for you, really. It is core things is going back to basics and saying, why do you exist? And these are things which are really going to set you apart. Make It Happen was created in 2006, basically from a conversation. And it was, how do you make things happen? That's what we do. And actually that was one of our key things. And one of our missions is to actually challenge the way bulk standard business is undertaken, and actually embed culture, values and ethics in all that we do. And that's something that we found is important as individuals, but also we found there's a market for that as well. So it really takes an individual to really reflect on these key areas, because without really effectively demonstrating and communicating those, your business plan will pretty much be meaningless, unfortunately. Okay, so Once we've got the basics and the framework there, going back to what we were saying before, it's about researching your need. So this is so important with funding and fundraising, and particularly when you're proactively selling products. So one of the core things you need to demonstrate, and this can be within an appendix or within your core document, it doesn't really matter, but you really need to understand who your competitors are. You need to understand what they're doing well and what they're not doing well. You need to understand actually the pricing policy, how they're providing services, who they're selling to, and actually, wherever possible, find out what they're trying to become. Because competitors are always going to be competitors, but actually sometimes you can work together and provide complementary products and services, especially during the early stages. You may even become a subcontractor to a bigger competitor. And that's fine because it can create an income stream, it can create more confidence from your point of view, and actually enables you to trial out products and services perhaps a little bit more risk adversely. Now one of the things, actually the biggest thing why funding actually falls down on is government and governance. What you've actually got a situation of now is central government are changing. Not politically, not at the moment anyway, but that they're changing where they're creating new policies and procedures. They're creating new centralised guidance of what's happening within the UK, both in health, education, crime, economically. These are all the things which obviously naturally they affect. But if you look and investigate within your market what's happening at a national level, what you can then do is articulate that down in the regional and local level. Because ultimately, if you know that there's a big change within, I don't know, volunteering nationally, you can bet your bottom dollar within about 6 months that will cascade down to your local environment. So you then know how to plan for the future, because ultimately that's going to be developed and planned and implemented locally. But also, one of the key things is understanding what the strategies are. So again, take health, education, justice. All those strategies are published locally through the council or other services. So the best thing to do is actually have a look about what the locally individuals and the public sector are planning to do. Because that will make sure that what you want to develop and plan is actually going to be relevant for the locality. And again, that can be regionally, it can be nationally, and it can be internationally, to be fair. And then you need to have a look about why people are going to purchase. So it's translating that information to say, okay, what makes you different? So it is about your own unique selling point, but it's actually beyond that. It's at what need are you going to address? So whether that's selling a cup, whether that's selling a table, or selling an hour of somebody's time, it doesn't matter. But the chances are there will be market competition. So you need to demonstrate why you are the best. And then actually think about how can they purchase. Because actually, are people purchasing more online? You know, through PayPal and other methods, e-commerce, you know, shops online. Are people coming to you, you know, in an office to buy a service? Is it a shop front? Or is it actually just over the phone? And actually, one of the biggest things which prevents growth and development is very much the barrier of trying to purchase. So, for example, there's nothing worse than phoning up to try and get a quote or try to get a piece of advice, and it goes onto answer phone, or a person's not there. So thinking about actually the effect of that, how many people are you potentially missing out on? And then you can start to really define how people can engage with you. And then you need to have a look about, okay, what's coming up in the future? So what are the market forces? What is the social forces? Because actually the way we are now is not the way we're going to be in 5 years' time or 10 years' time. And you don't have to align your whole business towards that, but you've got to take that in consideration. Otherwise there's a problem, because you're only going to be relevant for a few years. So you've always got to keep that in mind in the future. Okay, so think of an organisation. As social entrepreneurs, you've got many avenues, and your income can come from any of these 4 squares here. So trading is all about trading for individuals and to businesses. Commissioning is about trading to the public sector, so contracts or service level agreements. And that's possible quite easily in some ways, but can be quite challenging in others. So those 2 can represent your enterprising element of your organisation. And the ones below that in funding and fundraising are very much your social side, your added value side. So funding is all about grant funding and trust funding. So big lottery, for example, actually unlimited would fall into that. And then fundraising, that's not about shaking tins anymore. It's actually looking about donations, sponsorship, e-giving, etc., etc. But we'll come on to that shortly. So as I said, it's focusing on where your products and services is relevant. And if it's relevant to markets, you've got to think about who within their markets will engage. So again, just take health, because everyone understands that pretty much. Actually, everyone sees going to the local GP or the local NHS as a way of generating income. And it is. But actually, we also know that within the next 12 months, majority of people with long-term enduring health needs will have their own personal budget. And that personal budget will enable people to buy directly from you. And that changes a lot of organisations within that arena. So that's when you need to really consider how things are changing. And then only use funding and fundraising to create, develop and pilot products and services. Try not to use it to run your organisation. If you do, you get into something which the third sector knows very well, called the funding trap. And you just go from pot to pot of money, and you actually lose why you actually set up your own organisation in the first place. Okay, so promoting income. So there are a couple of kind of tips that I can give you, and this is about marketing yourself in many ways, but kind of defining why you're different. And this is my only little bit of animated stuff on the whole session. There we go. So if you're trading, what you need to do is demonstrate your local value, especially when you're small and just starting out. Why are you important to the local community? And how can you communicate to the local community to get them to buy you? Well, first of all, you're local. So straight away you know the locality, you know the culture, you know the beliefs. Actually, you also know people. And the chances are you're going to engage with very small organisations. Also, it's about that emotional value. So people will buy into you because they believe in you. And when you're small, that's quite easy to do because you may be the only person who's doing this. And as you get busier, people buy into people within your organisation. And that's why it's really important to make sure they reflect your own values of your organisation. Commissioning, actually what they want to know is about how much you're going to save them and actually how much that retains in the local economy. So it is about price, but it's an impact as well. So as a result of providing a service, how much money can you save us? And then if I give you £10,000, how much of that £10,000 would remain in the local economy? Because that's really important for economic regeneration. And then funding and fundraising, again, it's actually similar. Fundraising is all about connecting with an individual. So if you can develop a relationship with a donor, they're more likely to come back and repeat a donation or grow in size of donation. And again, it's about that local connection, that local value. And funding is actually a mixture of all three. Funders are looking for more of that value for money, value added. So it is about that financial impact, but it is about that local and emotional connection as well. So that's a bit more of a non-traditional way of looking at generating income. but it's actually the way that as social entrepreneurs, that social motivated element that you have, that's how you can sell yourself differently than core organisations who just do it for the money. So what we've got is looking at how income can be developed and diversified. So we've looked at 4 areas that can be very useful and actually get your thinking in a different way. A sustainable organisation will always have multiple sources of income, but actually it's looking about how you're going to develop into new areas as well, and how can you become sustainable. And if any of you have gone on some marketing work, you'll actually recognise this model. But it's actually quite a simplistic one, which actually works quite well visually as well. So when you first start out, you will go where you know. You'll sell products to where you believe you know anyway. You'll sell it into a market or a location that you know, and it's quite safe. And there's nothing wrong with that at all, because that's the actual most risk adverse and probably the most resource not restricted by resources. So actually you can do it quite efficiently and quickly. But what you'll find is the chances are that market will be quite saturated already. So if you're going in with an old product in an old market, people are already used to buying certain things, and they may have their own loyalties with other organisations. So you're going to have to break into that market. But again, if you know it and you've got an established product, it's just a matter of communicating. But over time, what you need to consider is how you can develop. And you can develop in different ways, because what you've got is your innovation head-on. So yes, you may be selling to the educational sector, but actually you've come up with a new way of working, a new service, a new training session, a new product. And that's where you can sell that new product to an old market. And that old market will still be there, you still know it, but you're using your connections to be able to develop something new. So again, it's quite risk adverse, or certainly risk managed. So then what you've got moving around, old products and new markets. Now this area again is it may be selling at an hour of somebody's time, or a product or service, or whatever it may be. But you're going to somewhere where it's not comfortable. And it may be selling, I know, an educational product into health. And actually there's some synergies there, but you have no experience within health. You don't know what the sector is, you don't know how it's changing. Or it may even be a new area. So like anything, you do your homework. You know, you go out and you make connections. You create your own network of information, your own network of partners and collaborators. And actually you learn that market. But because you know what your product costs, because it's an old one, you actually are in a managed risk situation where you know how much it costs to deliver, and actually you would trial it for a period of time. If it doesn't work, you can stop. And then you're kind of in the riskier side, and this is where you can actually use funding for, to be fair, is new products, new service. Complete innovation, something which is not really out there at the moment, generating sustainable income. And this is where a lot of people get stuck and never go into this area. And you don't have to. But within a changing market, you've got to consider. And if you can do that, your business plan is far stronger, far more robust. So again, these are areas you need to consider now, is how are you going to develop and where. So looking about that income generation. What products and services you're going to create and deliver. But more importantly, in many ways, can be actually who's going to help you, who's going to support you. Just because a competitor's out there doesn't mean they're always a competitor. Especially when you're small and starting out, it's all about building those partnerships and collaboration relationships. And it's looking about how that can benefit you. As you grow, unfortunately, you need infrastructure. And that infrastructure comes at a cost. But working together, you can actually pool some of your resources and actually start working together And that may be administration, that could be finance, could be HR, it could be business development, marketing. It doesn't actually really matter. But actually partnering and doing collaboration work can be a great way to reduce your overheads in the early years before you're ready to grow and develop. And then think about where is income going to come from in the market. So that there are places locally and regionally which are being redeveloped, where some parts of town centres are quiet now but will be busy in the future. So you can go from that basic thought process to wholesale changes within the UK of how money is distributed, the welfare reforms, health and social care reforms. So again, it's looking at that context. Your business plan has to demonstrate that. So thinking about generating income and thinking about doing it through impact. Because actually this is the best way of actually demonstrating value towards people. So if you provide a computer to somebody, people have got choices where to go and buy computers every day of the week. You know, you can't walk down the high street or, you know, in the edge of town retail park without bumping into 1, 2, 3 organisations. So you need to say, okay, I am selling a laptop, I am selling a computer, but what else? What else does it give me? What else are you going to do? Are you going to provide 2 or 3 hours worth of support to get people used to the software? Are you going to provide them with training? Are you going to provide maintenance? Are you going to provide follow-up support? Are you going to provide a trading after 3 years? Those type of things which may not necessarily be in the marketplace now, but will demonstrate and prove impact on people. And is that impact that you can market far differently than a lot of normal companies. Again, thinking about health, actually, if I provide services to someone who's over 65 and I can support them to live longer within their own homes, I'm stopping people going to hospital. And actually, a hospital bed, an inpatient bed, costs the NHS £255 a night. So if my service costs less than £255, I've got a financial saving. And that financial saving can very quickly turn into social value and social impact. So it's looking about the extent of what you provide, not just the actual transaction, but far beyond that. And that will certainly help you. So looking at social impact, these are the areas where it can come in. Very, very important when selling your services to the public sector. And that can say, it doesn't have to be a big organisation, it can quite happily be small. So it's looking about your economic impact. So what is the value of someone buying, liaising or purchasing a product or service? And this is very much about how much can you save an individual. Then you look about the health impact. Are people more confident, healthier, wealthier, happier? Social society. Are people engaging with you more? Are people volunteering more? These are things which actually people take for granted, but are actually a key selling point of your organisation and need to be in your business plan. Employment. Are you creating employment? Are you supporting employment? And as a result of the employment, what's changing for people? Obviously housing, that's all about social housing. So are you creating more, developing more, supporting more? Are people learning new knowledge, skills and experience as a result of what you do? And as a result of having that new knowledge, are people doing things differently? And ultimately you will have an impact on the environment, because obviously if you're driving back and forward, actually that's carbon emissions, that can be a negative. If you're supporting people to recycle, that's a positive. So these are the things that will help you communicate to people. But if you know what people value, you will know how to communicate with your own personal values. And by doing that, you create that loyalty and bond. So basically, just what it says there, use your impact to prove your value to promote your organisation. So important. So on to marketing now. So again, we're building a business plan which is effective for multiple markets. But ultimately, it's about communicating, because if you can't communicate to your service users or to your stakeholders, it's a little bit tricky and you won't be here tomorrow. So the first thing is, on that inner circle, is creating or defining, communicating what you're producing. So your outcome and outputs. So are you supporting X amount of people? And if so, what has been the outcome of that support? Have you provided 15 laptops to a community centre? And as a result of that, people can now have different online lifestyles. They can now go online shopping or online banking. So that's the core. So that's one way of communicating. But then you go to that next step, and that's actually, what is that product? So how is that product going to meet a need? How is that product or service going to give somebody something they don't already have, or if they do have it, what you provide is better? So you start need to look at that. And then you're looking at going one stage further and saying, okay, your outcomes and your products will produce an impact. So at the moment, if you go down the funding route, they go up to outputs and outcomes, and they're only just about starting on the impact. But society is wanting this. People are making choices differently. So then we move on to that value. So you demonstrate what your value is, and if you can demonstrate that, you've got your USP, so your unique selling point. And that's what makes you different. No one else can actually challenge that, because that's what you are as an individual organization or an individual person. So understanding your own value is defined by knowing what your impact is, knowing what your products and services are, and knowing what outcomes and outputs you want to create. Any marketeer will love that, because that gives them everything they need to be able to go to the next step. So communication, actually everyone thinks externally, but it's actually internally as well. So if you're larger, one of the biggest problems is you fail to communicate your purpose, your product, your value, your products and services, your markets, your stakeholders. So it's looking about what structure are you going to create internally to regularly communicate to potential markets, potential service users, potential customers. Because one of the biggest things people forget is it's great having all this passion and enthusiasm and products, but it doesn't translate. So do you regularly engage? Do you regularly promote? Do you use e-media, social media? Do you attend groups? Do you attend networking events? But more importantly, do you tell people internally what you're doing? Because actually some of the best development people, best business and income generation people can come from within. So they're the ones with passion and enthusiasm. So what's your key message? So your key messages are those key attributes of your organization, your value that you'll have, your impact that you will have. And those are the quick snapshots in many ways of how you can demonstrate to people very quickly why they should go to you. So think about how you communicate your value. Think about how individuals have different set of values. So going back to what we were saying before, public sector like cost cutting or don't like it, they have to do it. They're very financially driven, so actually demonstrate your financial value. Service users don't need that. They want to know, make sure you're the right person and going to listen, nurture, understand. So demonstrate your personal value. And it's those type of things you've got to consider in a different way now. Okay, so once you've got your product and you can communicate, you've got to think about how you're going to take your things to market. So what I've done is actually put a few ideas on there and a few thoughts in many ways. So think about your profile. What is your profile of people who will buy your product, and is it changing? What's the best methods of engaging you? Is it online? Is it face-to-face? Is it via different shows? Think about the actual, some of the traditional methods as well, because traditional is about doing leaflets and posters. It has limited value in some places, depending on what sort of organisation you are, however, it can be effective. Now, there are different stats, but up to 64% of purchases are now made online. And actually 2 out of 3 recommendations through social media people act on. So if I say actually make it happen's great, actually you're more likely to say okay great, I'll have a look and yes, I'll buy from them. but actually it's the same with any other products and services in the country. So it's looking about your e-media presence, it's looking at your social media presence. And what it's called is basically your footprint. So where do you reach? Who are you connected with? Who are the influencers? And actually what you're looking for is those influencers who help you influence other people. And sometimes it's not all about direct marketing either, or direct routes to market. Actually think about your indirect, so using referral organisations. Some people who may be active within your market, but what you can do very, very quickly is develop a relationship with them, and they understand what your value is, and they will actually do some of your marketing for you. It's cheaper. It's a lot more cost effective, definitely, and actually you're developing a relationship and bond. And that's where selling a service is different than selling a product. You're selling a service, is about relationship and bond. You're selling a product, it's more focused on price and delivery. So think about the quality. We touched upon it before, but think about the quality, and that's about what your systems are internally. So when you first start out, you've got paperwork everywhere, you've got, processes everywhere, you've got maybe a few policies everywhere. Bring them all together. Because if you're going to tender for certain things, small, medium or large, you're going to have that portfolio of products and services, you're going to have that portfolio of processes and systems. Your outcomes, how are you measuring those outcomes? How do you know those outcomes are actually happening? And how are people going to trust what you say and tell them? So it's looking about how that can be achieved. And there's no right and wrong answer, it's very much individual to your own organisation. And think about the performance, so quality management performance. So if you're selling a service, how are you going to measure that quality? And that could be through feedback, that could be through one-to-ones. Really important. And then you think about actually how you're going to continue to be excellent and excel at what you do. Because yes, you'll always have a business when you're small, but ultimately you're not going to have a business if you're not continuing to innovate. And then consider what sort of standards and quality marks you need. Small organisations, actually, it's not always the main driver. But as you grow and develop, you've got to think about different standards. Investors in people, customer first, ISO 9001, etc., etc. So it's looking at that. Then we're thinking about HR, and HR is about, okay, one person, a bit more tricky, but as you grow and develop, it's all about what skills you've got internally and what training needs do you have. So your skills analysis, so you do that evaluation, and then that creates your training matrix. And that informs what training that you need in the years to come and inform your budget. Think about when you do take people on, whether it's volunteers and or staff, think about how you're going to support them through performance management. So are you going to do an annual appraisal? Are you going to do monthly one-to-ones, informal? How do you support people? Because it is core, that is. Because actually when you're selling a product, great, no problem, but it's about the people behind that, and if you lose skills, it's very, very difficult to replace them. Hence why succession planning is important. So succession planning is all about having that plan of action for people when they leave. So if your business development person goes, they take a lot of information and knowledge with them. So you've got to have somebody who can step in their shoes, or certainly take up the reins in the short term. Training and development, think about what development you need for new areas, new products. Think about personal progression. Think about, is it academically or is that more practically? And then think about actual mentoring and coaching, because actually it can be lonely. The smaller organisation you are can be very lonely as individuals or small businesses. So thinking about actually liaising with unlimited mentors is thinking about actually where do you get that kind of G up every now and then. And that can be a peer network that you can create, because actually there's many people like you. Think about risk. Okay, what are the risks to you achieving your vision? So we mentioned this earlier on, is actually coming up, and you can do it on a spreadsheet. It's pretty simple. What is the area? Why is it important? How could it be risky? What would you do to reduce the risk? And what would you do to manage the risk? So you've got those key headings, and those are operationally, so people don't turn up for work, car breaks down, that could be, or strategically, actually the market's changing, or the income is lost, or contracts not being renewed. And then that enables you to actually have a plan of action for key events happening, which is obviously naturally dead important. And then on to finance, which is arguably the most important, but a lot of you would know this anyway, is reflecting where your income's going to come from, both now and up to 5 years. Bear in mind we can only effectively forecast for 3, but we can always consider 5 years. Think about what your fixed costs are, and that's going to be what it's going to cost to open your office door, or what it will cost to open your business every day. And that may be the cost of insurance, the cost of your office. It could be your cost of core staff. And then look at your variables, and that's your cost of doing that activity. So that could be your extra hours worth of time, that could be travel expenses, that could be training. So your fixed you want to keep as low as possibly can, and your variable speaks for itself. Consider full cost recovery. Actually, within funding, people don't consider that anymore. They consider it norm, but actually people do also forget to put it in. So it's putting every bit of cost, both direct and indirect. So what is it going to cost to run you that service? And consider what do you need from your organisation to support it. So there's obviously insurance, there's obviously senior management time, there could be additional training. So always consider separate costs. So every single one of your services that you provide cost separately. So you know all the income and all the expenditure. And straight away you know if you've got sustainable activities. Consider how costs will increase over 2 and 3 years. So think about areas like inflation. That's between 3 and 4% at the moment, so that's huge. So even if you've got raw materials that you're purchasing, there's going to be an effect. Think about how staff wages may or may not increase. And if you're bidding for a contract or you're applying for grants, you've got to consider that in multiple years. Otherwise, the contract or the grant becomes unviable. And then actually consider the payment terms, because 3 out of 4, actually, I think 3 out of 4 businesses fail with cash flow. And that's great in many ways because you think, well, great, thanks very much. Of course I need more income. But actually there's no point unless you've got good payment terms. So the standards are obviously 30 days, but depending on size and the amount, you can actually look about doing payment up front. You can look at payment on invoice, pro forma invoices to keep that in cash flow coming. Because again, without that cash flow, you can't be dynamic. And then last one actually here is just cost matrix. So actually, on one spreadsheet is to find every bit of cost that you've got, and understanding where and how and if you can get it cheaper elsewhere. And cheaper can be financial, but the consideration of quality service has to come into play there too. Okay, so once you've got all that together, the core element, without a shadow of a doubt, is the action plan after. You've thought about it, you've planned it, you've developed it, but how are you going to turn it into reality? And this is where the action plan comes in. And all the key areas are there. All the key questions are there. So what you need to be able to do is to find them. Here, 10 years from now, is it important? So you can do it on a red, amber, green, or 1 to 5. What's the action? And who's going to be responsible? Because ultimately, just because you may be the CEO doesn't mean you're responsible for everything. It means you're accountable for everything, but you may have staff who are responsible for achieving. What you'll then do is actually have that element of the business plan as your live working document that you keep on reflecting back to. So your core document becomes the reference material, this becomes your live operational document. and hopefully by the end of year 1 you should have achieved everything in year 1. Your action plan can go over 3 years, with the year 1 being comprehensive, the year 2 being summary, and year 3 may be a vision. But as you move throughout the business plan, it becomes more succinct. So that is a very comprehensive, very quick also webinar on business planning and all the elements that need to go in. I hope you found it useful, and I'm more than happy to take any questions.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Richard. And we actually, I realize we are just at 1 o'clock now, so I do have a couple of questions. So let's go through those quickly, and then if we need to, we can follow up with the individuals who were asking the questions afterwards. That was all really, really useful, and thank you for that. I realize that it's a little bit unfair of us to ask you to do this and give you just an hour. In fact, we're giving you less than an hour to do this. So I appreciate this has been a bit of a whirlwind tour, but really useful key headlines, I think, for everyone to consider and take away. I think the question that I want to put to you first is a really good one. What would you say, out of all of the things that you were just discussing, what would you say is the most important section of the business plan?
Research. Research, evidence of need.
Yeah.
Majority of business fail because they've got a great idea, but they don't understand the market and the context in which their organisation would sit.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
So understanding who else is doing what you're doing, and if there's a real need for your
and what's liable to change in the short and medium term within that market.
Okay. A follow-up question, that same one came from the same person, and they were asking about, in terms of your financial forecasts, is it a must to show a profit or a surplus by the end of year 1?
No. No. Basically, it depends obviously how you're financed. Majority of organisations that we've ever been engaged with will be sustainable within 3 years.
Yeah.
It's unusual to have an organisation in profit with all costs covered within a year. So no, that's fine. You can put a deficit. All you need to be able to do is demonstrate how are you going to turn that deficit into obviously a positive in the future.
Another question was quite a specific one. It was about risk management. Are there any good risk management models for social entrepreneurs that you could recommend?
The answer is no, unfortunately. There's very little out there in risk management. I'm happy to send a template that I use out, but there's no specific ones for social entrepreneurs at all that I've seen.
That's great, thank you. So yeah, we'll get that template from you, and then I can then send it around after the webinar to everyone, including together with the slides. And then finally, this was actually my question. I was wondering, as you were talking everything through, around financial projections or projections about the social outcomes that a startup entrepreneur wants to achieve. Have you got any advice? Because when you're starting out, of course, all you can give is your best estimate.
Yes.
How do you go about? How do you then make them still sound realistic, even though really what you're doing is kind of outlining what you're hoping to do rather than something you've already done?
Do you know, the actual key thing is actually to create a series of social pledges.
Yeah.
So those social pledges will be similar to like a key performance indicator, but they'll be based around a social objective. So what you do is you say, this is what we plan to do, and make them smart, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic and time-bound, naturally. But at the end of the first year, you evaluate your performance against them.
Okay.
So that's completely credible in a social impact and a social value context. So you can always forecast what you're going to achieve as long as you evaluate what you have achieved against those.
Okay, so funders are okay with your sort of best estimate, and then it's after the year
Yes.
one, year two that you then start to look back and see how you've done.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Brilliant. Last question, and then I think you're going to have to bring this to a close because we've gone about 5 minutes over already. How can we prove or demonstrate sustainability?
By but three areas actually.
Yeah.
One is obviously financially. So that is making sure that you're sustainable within a given period of time, free from public sector grants.
Yeah.
Second thing is sustainable impact. So that is to demonstrate that you are providing impact and value to your end service user.
Yeah.
And the third one is sustainable product and service development. And that's making sure you continue to be relevant to the market in which you're in.
Brilliant. That's great. Thank you very much. And I think we'll close there. If anyone else has got more questions, please keep them coming, send them to me, and we'll find a way to get back to you. But for now, I just want to say a big thank you. Our next webinar will be on the 8th of May. It'll be Introduction to Marketing, and that will be then followed. We will have a number of other webinars also coming up later in the year, and we will keep everyone posted. We'll let you have the links how to register in due course. But for now, unless Richard, you have any final words, I think we'll bring this to a close, and just a big thank you to you for your time.
It's a pleasure. Apart from thanks for listening, no, that's all my end.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Hope everyone has a
Thank
good
you.
day. Thanks.